Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 19 of the Memo KSR's Kentucky Women's Basketball Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at Friends of Cole. Katie, big episode. Again, it feels like the episode's just more and more important because we're talking about more important stuff. But before we get into all of it, Katie, just how are you doing today?
Feeling pretty good, especially with where Kentucky is placed in the SEC tournament bracket and all the stuff going on coming up this March. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and there's obviously that's what we got to get to, right? But of course, to start, just like every episode, some ranking stuff. In the AP poll, Kentucky leaps 3 spots to number 12. I think this is about right for Kentucky right now. Maybe you could see them above a certain team, maybe not. But Katie, I don't think I can argue with number 12 a whole lot.
No, especially with how close they stayed with South Carolina. I think the number 12 is, not necessarily generous. I think it's right. And I think that because Kentucky played so good against one of the best teams in the nation, they kind of proved their spot.
And then in the net, Katie, Kentucky was down at 22, and they went up to 20, and now they're at number 19. So they keep climbing in the net. 8 of the top 20 teams in the SEC are all, top 20 in the net. Again, it seems about right to me. Ole Miss, Tennessee, all still really high. Oklahoma, of course, super high in the net. Katie, number 19 feels about right. Of course, now that the regular season over, I don't know like how much resume wins matter as much, but Kentucky's got quite a few under their belt, and I think that shows in the net rankings.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, I think that this is a fair ranking, and I think that it kind of shows when it comes to the way that they play.
And then the NCAA on February 27th did another bracket preview show. This one was on ESPN2. The first one was on ABC. Kentucky was number 13. Now they're 14th overall, but Katie's still sitting pretty to 4 seed. But of course, very infamously, kind of the night that all came out, it kind of just became quickly outdated, right? Like Kentucky beat Tennessee by 1,000. Notre Dame lost. I can't think of all the schools that lost, but a bunch of teams lost, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, the update the NCAA committee just sent out, it's kind of outdated. But with that win over Tennessee, Katie, I would say Kentucky, in the eyes of the NCAA, I would imagine they probably swap with Tennessee. Of course, Tennessee, now that they lost to Georgia, they're actually probably out of the top 16 overall. But regardless, my point being, Katie, Kentucky, very good position to host the first 2 rounds in the committee's eyes.
Yeah, especially since they have some wiggle room, I would say. Even though they're named 14 overall, they can still drop to 15 or 16 and still get that home court advantage for the first 2 rounds. So I think that that's something to be happy about.
And again, like the committee's release, I almost feel bad for them because it's like they sent this out, and then everyone started losing. Well, Kentucky started winning, and of course that propelled them up to a 3 seed, and that's kind of how ESPN sees it too. Charlie Cream in his latest bracketology update had Kentucky as a 3 seed. Would play Green Bay in the first round. And Katie, when I think of Green Bay, first of all, their mascot, Katie, if you didn't know, the Green Bay, they're the Phoenix. And so that's always cool. But also Doug Gottlieb coaching on the men's side, maybe the worst basketball coach in the history of the sport. I mean, I think they're like 2-30. Like Green Bay is just horrible. But Katie, I think ESPN's bracketology update, again, Kentucky being at a 3 seed, I think that's more kind of realistic, more updated of where Kentucky kind of stands right now.
I'm not going to lie to you. I have not even seen a single game from Green Bay this season, so I don't really know what this team has to offer, but one can assume that Kentucky can easily handle them. But I think being a 3 seed is super cool, especially compared to where Kentucky was last year. Just being in the tournament feels so good, and to be one of the top teams is just, and it's a great feeling.
Well, Green Bay is 26-5, and they've only lost 1 conference game, Katie. Now, here's what I think is really interesting about Green Bay. You look at their schedule, and you look at the teams they've played. Like, they lost to Kansas State, who, makes sense. Like, they lost to Kansas State, Virginia, Purdue, Fort Wayne, who Kentucky beat. and Creighton, and then Northern Iowa too. But Northern Iowa, they beat Iowa State early in the year. I don't know, but like Green Bay, 19-1 in the conference. It's not a bad team, but still a team Kentucky should be able to handle in that first round if they were to meet. But regardless, I just like to think of them because one, they're the Phoenix, and Phoenix is obviously the best name God ever put on this planet. But number two, Doug Gottlieb is a horrible basketball coach and probably an even worse sports analyst. But Katie, I wanted to talk about Georgia Amoore for a second because there's just something about Georgia Amoore, man. Like today, the Nancy Lieberman National Point Guard of the Year finalist list, and that's a mouthful, but that came out today. She's one of the 5 finalists. She's alongside Paige Beckers at UConn, Kiki Rice at UCLA, Olivia Miles at Notre Dame, and Rory Harmon at Texas. Katie, I think I tweeted this out. Men, women, and children lie, but numbers don't. Katie, in my opinion, Georgia Amoore is the best point guard in the country, and she should win this award.
I think that from a casual fan standpoint, you look at this list and you're like, okay, obviously it's Paige Beckers because that's the name that kind of has like the most attention or the most traction. But I feel the same way. I think Georgia Amoore should very clearly win this award because she has set records. She has completely turned this program around, and she has just been one of the most, I would say, live up to the hype players that we've seen this season. And, I think that she's deserving.
Well, here's what I got to say, right? First of all, she averages the most points, 18.8, and the most assists, 6.9 per game among the finalists. I personally feel like that's almost good enough. She led Kentucky to this 22-6 record, double bye in the SEC tournament. But Katie, I was kind of digging. And, she sets, program record, 43 points at Oklahoma. And like you said, record setting, joining Sabrina Ionescu and Caitlin Clark, of all people, 2,300 points, 800 career assists, one of only 3 players to do that. But Katie, I was digging, and I thought this was interesting too. Georgia Amoore, in all of, in 28 games, she scored in double digits every single game but one. And that one was the win over Illinois in Nashville. She recorded 8 assists and 2 steals in that game. But Katie, you can't say that about any of the other finalists. Olivia Miles and Paige Beckers scored double digits in every game but 2. Right? Georgia Amoore. So, I think when you think about what a point guard does, it's, for one, for me, consistency above all else. As the floor general, as the captain, as the mini-me, as, whatever superlative you want to say, you got to be consistent, and you got to be able to produce. And Katie, I don't know, quite literally, no one else has done that quite like Georgia Amoore. Even Paige Beckers, who, of course, everyone knows, she's the national media's favorite golden child this year. And, of course, I'm not saying she doesn't deserve that credit. She's obviously very good. But Katie, Georgia Amoore, best point guard in the country, most production. Again, like I said, men, women, and children lie, but numbers don't, Katie. Georgia Amoore, what do you think? We've already said it, but I think she should win this award.
Yeah, and you can make the argument that maybe she's not the most efficient from the field, and maybe she's not. But to me, that doesn't really matter because she's making the shots, she's getting the points, and she's also finding the open shots. So it doesn't really matter if she's not making all 17 of the balls that she tries to put through the hoop. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. If anyone could go 17 for 17, obviously they'd automatically win this award. But for Georgia Amoore, especially like you said, when it comes to being a point guard, it's not just about shooting. It's also about producing and being able to facilitate your teammates in a way that makes them better. And I think that she does that.
She's the quarterback, and she's the quarterback, but she also plays wide receiver, running back. She's snapping the ball to herself. She's blocking. Georgia Amoore doing it all. But Katie, I want to talk about that butt whooping. You want to talk about, after Auburn beat Kentucky on the men's side, they did the whole belt thing. You want to talk about putting belt to behind, Katie? Kentucky absolutely whooped Tennessee 82-58. Now, I just want to go ahead and say, Kim Caldwell, I know that's your system that you do down there at Tennessee, but I feel like you were kind of shooting yourself in the foot by doing it. It's kind of like we said after that game. I get it. You can't throw your whole system out for a game. But why in the world, Katie, would you try to push, and press against this team? Why would you play up tempo when Kentucky, Katie, thrives in transition? I mean, I'm not going to complain. It worked out, and you saw a 24-point win, biggest win over the Lady Vols in program history, which is a crazy thing to say too. But Katie, just how about that win?
I mean, it was a great win, and I know that kind of both of us were a little bit worried just because it's a big game and it had a lot of, seeding implications for the SEC tournament. But I think that, like you said, Kim Caldwell's system just did not really work against Kentucky, and clearly that is something that Kenny Brooks and the rest of the team worked on. I think it's important to note that most of the players on Kentucky's team had really standout games, including Clara Silva. She did a great job. So I think that that's important to note that Tennessee's offense wasn't necessarily working out for them, but neither was their defense, and I feel like that was really where the downfall came for them.
And it's on the bottom of our screen, but I figured it's important to note. Claire Strack, who in that game recorded her 67th and I believe 68th block of the season in that game. That is now a program record for single season, blocks in a season. And then the team overall, I think, like 182 and then 183rd block of the year. That's also, single season record. So that's obviously great to see. Seeing size and length that you've never seen before. Katie, no shock that you get those kinds of records, but let's talk about Claire Strack, right? Because 23 points, but Katie, it's not just that she scored 23 points, and it's not even just that she grabbed 15 rebounds, and it's definitely not just because she blocked 3 shots. Katie, she went 11 of 11 from the field, making her only 3. I mean, Katie, perfection from Claire Strack, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she has done this yet this season, but they pointed out in the press conference that Claire Strack has now done this twice against Kim Caldwell. She did it last season in the NCAA tournament at Virginia Tech against Marshall, and then she did it the other day against Tennessee under Kenny Brooks. So it's just cool to have a player like Claire Strack who I think is kind of on her way to becoming this like Kentucky legacy player because she is so talented as a sophomore. She's making history, setting so many records. She is just, I mean, truthfully, she is one of the best players on this team, and I literally don't know what they would do without her.
And then you have Georgia, Amoore, and Tiani Key, who combined for 36 points. Key had 10 rebounds and Moore had 7 assists. And then Katie, here's Deja Lawrence, who had a really good all-around game, kind of flew under the radar just a little bit. 13 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists from her. So that's really good to see. Someone who, even when you look at her stats, just doesn't quite fill up the stat sheet as much. Obviously, she can score, but the rebounds and assists typically aren't there. But 5 and 5 from her is really good. Now, Katie, the thing about Kentucky, they just shot the lights out. And I say that, they did, but they didn't, right? Like 52% overall and 24% from 3. But Katie, the big story from this game was the rebounding. You beat Tennessee on the boards 52-31. Katie, it just feels like to me you finally, again, since the LSU game, you kind of seen things kind of an upward trajectory as far as rebounding goes. But Katie, 52-31, that's really good for a team that, wasn't too long ago. They got out-rebounded, by a Missouri team that's not too great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that you could say is Kentucky definitely had the size advantage over Tennessee, or I would say the height advantage. Um, but yeah, I mean, even just improving on the offensive boards is something that I feel like we've both kind of been waiting to see for most of the season. And so for Kentucky to have a few really good games on the offensive boards, it's just really important for them heading into tournament time.
And, you held Tennessee to just 6 threes and 21% from deep, and they're the best three-point shooting team in the country. They came into that game scoring 89.7 points per game, number 1 offense in the country, and you hold them 31.7 points below their average. I mean, scoring 82 points is good. It's actually pretty good. But Katie, holding the best offense in the country that low, that just says, dividends about your defense and what, again, like Kenny Brooks said it on his radio show, a couple minutes ago, defense is very, very, very underrated, Katie.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that one thing to kind of think about as well is Kentucky beat Tennessee by almost 30 points, and then Tennessee turned around and lost to Georgia, who is one of the worst teams in the SEC. And I don't think that was just because Tennessee isn't good. You cannot say that Tennessee isn't good and that's why they lost to Georgia. I truly think it's because Kentucky messed with the rhythm. I don't know if that's how you feel, but that's how I feel. So I think that this was a great game overall.
I think messed with the rhythm is a very polite way to put it. I'm going to bust out my tiny little violin and sadly play, Tennessee. We broke Tennessee, and it's hilarious, and I'm here for it because Tennessee sucks, and they're going to suck forever. Katie, before we move on to the next game, I want to give a quick shout to our friends over at Friends of Coal. Of course, Friends of Coal is dedicating to informing and educating Kentucky citizens about the coal industry and its vital role in the state's future. We provide a united voice for an industry that has been and remains a critical economic contributor to Kentucky. By working together, we can provide good jobs and benefits for future generations. Coal is resilient, reliable, and affordable. Friends of Coal is a volunteer organization. All are invited to be a part of our organization, which consists of proud Kentuckians as well as residents from beyond our borders. Head to friendsofcoalkentucky.org to learn more. But Katie, it's not as fun to talk about as the Tennessee game was, but I feel like you got to kind of talk on the South Carolina game a little bit because you played it and just unfortunately it was a loss. 78-66 was the final. It's kind of like we talked about. You beat Tennessee, so you got the double bye, and you came into this game kind of playing with house money, Katie. Kenny Brooks revealed post-game that Georgia Amoore is a little banged up, but really even more so Clara Strack is a little banged up. He said kind of bruised thigh, knee area, kind of hobbled around in practice, just wanted to be out there with their sisters and play. So obviously credit to her because, tough as nails to go out there and play against South Carolina and do that. But Katie, what was your initial thoughts kind of after the loss? Because I don't want to write it off as, well, it doesn't matter. But I guess kind of when you think about it, Katie, like it didn't matter a ton because you couldn't do anything else, really.
Yeah, I mean, even though it didn't necessarily matter in this grand scheme of things, I think that we can kind of come out of this game more optimistic than pessimistic because it shows you that Kentucky can hang with the best teams in the nation. And I think some people had a conversation on the KS board thread during the game about, is South Carolina a Final Four contending team? When I predicted Final Four, South Carolina is not necessarily in it, but I don't think that they can't make it. I think that South Carolina is a Final Four contender. And if Kentucky can hang close with South Carolina, then I think that makes Kentucky a Final Four contender as well.
I really like that because, well, the thing about playing South Carolina is, again, you played them on the road. You played them at South Carolina, where they've only lost one game there since 2020, and of course that was this year to UConn, right? Like playing South Carolina at South Carolina is no easy task. It's a very tall feat, and it's almost like kind of a certain death. Like you're probably just gonna lose that game. But I'm kind of like you trailed by one. It was 64-65 in the fourth quarter, or 63-62, something like that. Like Kentucky was in it, and it's just unfortunately South Carolina is the one that made that run. Kind of, I feel like behind their home crowd. And again, South Carolina is just, you can tell they have the better athletes, like 10 McDonald's All-Americans, and, which is just a crazy thing to say. And by the way, I want to go off on a little spill real quick because I saw on social media today, it was a South Carolina fan account. I don't know the name, so I couldn't credit them even if I wanted to. But they posted it's like a 7-second clip, and it's Kenny saying, like, talking about how, I don't even remember the quote exactly, but he's talking about how South Carolina, they got 10 All-Americans and blah, 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 blah. And some South Carolina person was like, why is Kenny complaining? And I'm just, confused. Like, you see my eyebrows are, scrunched and that weird triangle that's right there. Complaining. What's he complaining about? He's crediting Don State. He's giving you a compliment that you have so many talented players. But I saw that had 100,000 views, and all these people were replying, yeah, him and Kim Mulkey complain. And I'm like, what are they complaining about? Because I remember the Kim Mulkey quote, because because whenever they played South Carolina, she was like, Dawn's got 10 All-Americans on the team. And she, in very Kim Mulkey fashion, she's like, what? Like, how do you even maintain that many players? But I don't feel like they were complaining when they were talking about it. I just, I went off on a little tangent, but I just feel like they weren't complaining. I feel like South Carolina fans just received the message horribly wrong. Like they're complimenting you for crying out loud. But Katie, it's like I was saying, before I went off on that random spill, South Carolina just obviously has the better athletes. And they obviously have, I feel like they're a bit quicker. Didn't outmatch Kentucky again. It was a 1-point game at one point. But Katie, my point in saying all that is like Kentucky proved, and it's like you said, they could hang with them. They could hang with the big dogs, right? Or I guess South Carolina is the one team that I don't want to say that for. So they could prove they could hang with the big dogs, Katie.
Yeah, and I think that it's honestly just such a confidence booster heading into the SEC tournament because, as we'll talk about in a minute, the draw, even though Kentucky gets a double bye, it's still a very difficult bracket, I would say, for Kentucky. It's a very difficult road to the championship. So I think just being able to prove that they can hang with, South Carolina, even whenever Amoore and Schrock aren't necessarily 100%, is a confidence booster. And I think that it's really nice that Kentucky doesn't have to play till Friday because they played yesterday. And now they get some time to actually rest and heal and be, more composed. And I don't know. I'm just looking forward to this SEC tournament because I feel like Kentucky can really do something big here.
So let's talk about it, right? Because who cares about losing when you got winning ahead? Kentucky got the double bye in the SEC tournament. They play on Friday. It's looking like they'll play Oklahoma. Of course, Oklahoma plays the winner of Arkansas and Georgia, and then Kentucky plays the winner of that game. Of course, you think Oklahoma is going to win. But Katie, of course, you can see the bracket on our screen. I actually really, really like the field for Kentucky. Now, obviously, I would much rather play Alabama on Friday than Oklahoma. But Katie, I'm going to go ahead and just look at it kind of like you're winning. I would much rather play South Carolina on Saturday than I would Texas on Saturday because I think Kentucky, Katie, matches up a lot better with South Carolina. And then, of course, at that point, when you make it to the championship game, assuming you can pull off those wins, well, Katie, just why not, right? But I actually really like the field for how it's set up for Kentucky.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be tough regardless. I think being in the top 4 is obviously best case scenario, but that means that you're going to be up there with the next 3 best teams. And I do think that playing South Carolina in the first round is a little bit more convenient, I would say. Obviously, you don't want to play Texas. I feel like if there was any possible way for Kentucky to have played LSU, I feel like that is kind of the road that I would have rather taken. But of course, I mean, thankfully, the 1 and 2 seed came down to a coin toss, and Kentucky kind of got the better end of the stick. But at the same time, so did Texas. So I feel like Texas can easily handle LSU, and they'll kind of be fresh heading into the semis. So if Kentucky does beat South Carolina in the semifinals, then the championship is going to definitely – I think the championship is going to be Texas-Kentucky, and it's going to be a tough one if Kentucky makes it that far.
I was going to say, is that a final prediction, Texas-Kentucky, or are you just speculating, just talking about the fact?
I'm just talking about if Kentucky can make it that far. I'm not going to say that that's a for sure prediction.
Okay, gotcha. Because I was ready to hop on your bandwagon, but I guess I'll stay back a little bit, hoping that we can create our own bandwagon of sorts. But I want to go back. Of course, we're just previewing the tournament bracket, but I do want to kind of talk about the end of the regular season because, Stephen, we have the February-March bracket or graphic, if you can put that up for us. I mean, you finished 500, right? And that's kind of the thing we said all season long is if you can manage to go 500 in February and March, if you can just manage that, it's successful. And Katie, not only did Kentucky and Kenny Brooks do it, but they did it, and it got them this double bye, got them in good position for the SEC tournament. I mean, 22-6 and 11-5 in the SEC. Katie, I do feel like that's really, really impressive in year one under what was supposed to be this rebuild team of sorts.
Yeah, honestly, I guess I wouldn't even call this team a rebuild team because it clearly is one of the best teams in the nation. So if you want to call this a rebuilding team, then I can't wait to see what next year's team is going to be like. But yeah, I think going 500 in this stretch is very impressive. Of course, I think that you can look at this either way and say, oh, well, it could have been worse. Oh, it could have been better. Like, it definitely could have been better. It definitely could have been worse. But I'm happy with the position that Kentucky's in right now. And so I don't want to, talk about the past. I'm just ready to kind of get into the future.
And then we got our quad records graphic too. And, when you kind of look at where you look at the schedule, 5-5 in quad one, Katie, is not bad at all. Most team, there's the except like South Carolina finished the year, I think 12-3 in quad one or something ridiculous like that. But when you look at most teams in the net, Katie, they have a losing record in quad one. And so it's very impressive. Again, when you look at the teams that are up there, it's very impressive you went 5-5. And again, losing at Texas A&M is a really bad loss, and they ended up finishing 16th in the SEC, right? Like, that is a horrible loss. Thankfully not a quad four loss, but a bad loss nonetheless. But Katie, again, I don't know if that loss matters too much, because you look at some of the wins that Kentucky got, I think it kind of makes up for that loss when everything is said and done after this SEC tournament, and the committee kind of looks at Kentucky's resume and what they did, seeing where they'll put Kentucky in the end.
Yeah, and I feel like you could also kind of look at the UNC loss earlier in the season and kind of think, oh, well, if these two teams play now, then Kentucky would probably win. And I think that it makes the quad one wins look a little bit more impressive just because these teams that Kentucky lost to were towards the end of the season, like LSU and South Carolina and Texas. I mean, you played all three of those teams at the very, very end of the regular season. And so these teams are at their peak. Like, these teams have been playing all season long preparing for this moment. You're playing the best that this team will probably be until the tournament. And so I think that the quad records, I mean, when it comes to seeding, obviously it has a little bit of implication, but I don't think that it's going to end up being that detrimental to Kentucky.
And then Mississippi State and Louisville are both top 35 in the net. But Katie, Louisville's playing like a quad one team. Like, they're playing, Louisville, I know they just lost to Notre Dame, but that's also, Notre Dame, for crying out loud, right? Like, Louisville, I think they're playing like a top 25 team. I think that could very easily be a quad one type win for Kentucky too. But Katie, we're going to go ahead and dive into who Kentucky could face in the SEC tournament. We're going to start with the most probable opponent, at least when you just look at the bracket, and that's Oklahoma, who Kentucky beat Oklahoma on the road earlier this season, 95-86. Now, that was an incredible game. Of course, like we talked about earlier, that was the game where Georgia Amoore had 43 points, program record 43 points. But here's the thing about Oklahoma, Katie. They haven't lost since that game. They have won 7 consecutive games since they lost to Kentucky. I got a pit in my stomach. I ain't gonna lie, Katie. Like, I'm nervous heading into Friday, thinking Kentucky's gonna have to try to beat Oklahoma again on Friday. Like, hate that draw. But again, that's kind of part of the SEC tournament, Katie. But Oklahoma, it could be them on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, beating a team twice is always going to be difficult because the second time you play, the losing team will have a better feel for what the winning team did to beat them. And I think that one thing that you kind of have to look at is, okay, well, what did the stats look like when it came to Oklahoma and Kentucky the first time? And like you said, Georgia Amoore finished with 43 points. I mean, that is just crazy. But you had Tiani Key and Amelia Hassett finish for a combined 7 points, which is also crazy because those are two of your best players. You don't expect them to only score 2 points and 5 points apiece. I think the key to winning this game is not for Georgia Amoore to score 43 points again, but for Tiani Key and Amelia Hassett, not just them two, but, your 5 starters kind of step up and fill the shoes that they're supposed to fill.
And then Sahara Williams for Oklahoma. She had 27. Maybe limit her to like 15, right? Reagan Beers had 18 and 10. I think she's going to kind of just get that anyway. Try to keep her around that. Don't let her go off for 30 points against you, right? Like Oklahoma, very good team. I think that goes without saying, to end the regular season, Katie. Like we said, they won 7 games, and they had like an easier slate. Like they played at Arkansas, at Florida, but then they played Alabama. And, that game against Alabama, the way things stood, whoever won that game would be probably who Kentucky faced. And of course, that's Oklahoma. But Katie, we see it on the screen. Reagan Beers, all SEC type big, shooting 45% from three. I mean, that is just mind boggling in itself, averaging 17 and 9. Peyton Verhulst is their guard. She was at Louisville at one point, so we really don't like her. At least she left those dirty birds, left them hanging high and dry. 15 points, 6 rebounds per game. Again, Sahara Williams, who I was talking about, scored 27 on February 2nd, averages 10.7 points per game. And then Skylar Van, just another one of those players down low, 10.1 points and 4.7 rebounds per game. But Katie, Oklahoma, they scare me a little bit, but I have confidence heading into that possible matchup on Friday because, again, Kentucky beat them before, and I know it's very, very hard to beat a team, 2 times, especially a top 10 team like Oklahoma. But Katie, I have I'm worried at the, it's weird. I have a pit in my stomach, like I was saying, but at the same time, Katie, I do have a certain level of confidence heading into that potential matchup.
I mean, I have the same confidence as you, Phoenix. I feel like Kentucky can go in and win this, and I think what they're going to have to do is come in firing on all cylinders because Oklahoma will just have played a game on Thursday, so they're not really going to have time to rest in between their game against Arkansas or Georgia. So I think that for Kentucky to pull off the win, like I said, I mean, everyone's just going to have to be on. Everyone's going to have to be clicking offensively. And then, like you said, hold Reagan Beers and Sahara Williams to less than 20 points.
And, I think that's a really big thing you just hit on, that Oklahoma won't have the rest that Kentucky's going to have. They'll have to have played a game. Now, hopefully they lose and Kentucky gets a more, easier opponent. But regardless, even if Oklahoma wins, they're not going to be rested. They're going to be, they just played the day before. Like, that's a huge, huge advantage Kentucky has with the double bye. But, Katie, let's go ahead and just hope that Oklahoma loses, right? You don't have to play them again. You know who I'd rather play? Georgia. For a third time this season, I would rather play Georgia again. Of course, you beat them 78-64 on the road, and then their biggest win in the SEC play, 29-point win, 84-65 at home. Katie, Georgia's not very good. I know they have Nia Leverett, but she doesn't produce down there. Like, Katie, I'd love to play Georgia. I think that's pretty simple.
Yeah, I think that it's honestly probably the best case scenario just because I think we'll talk about in a second, but Arkansas kind of got a big win over the weekend. So I feel like Georgia is kind of the team that you want to play if you're Kentucky, especially because they don't necessarily have any standout players that can go for, 20, 25 points like Oklahoma has. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. I just think that you would rather play Georgia in this case.
The thing about Georgia, it's like we said before, they're just not great, right? Like Trinity Turner is their best player, and she's had the best outings against Kentucky. In that first game, she had 19, and then in that second game, Katie, she had 22. Like, Trinity Turner is their best player, and she's had the best time against Kentucky. But my kind of point of view in that is, well, they're going to have to play – like, she's going to have to – like, somebody's going to have to score for them, and I'd rather it be her. Mia Woolfolk, she – Kentucky held her to, I think it was, I'm trying to look real quick, but I think it was like 2 points in that. Yeah, 2 points in that first game. And then she responded with 9, averaging 11 points per game. Damari Flournoy had 19 points first time around, averaging 11.2 points per game. And then Asia Avenger, 9.7 points per game, 4.4 assists, and 3.8 rebounds per game. But Katie, the thing about Georgia, and it's like we've already said, I really would like to play Georgia, like even more so than Arkansas, who we're about to talk about in a second.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm also looking at the box score from when they played at Kentucky. And you just talk about Damari Flournoy. She only scored 2 points in that game, but she only played 13 minutes. I can't exactly remember why she only played 13 minutes in that game. But clearly there was something going on there. And I feel like as long as Kentucky, like in that game, Trinity Turner had 22, but everyone else was in single digits. And I feel like if you can kind of repeat that again, you've got the win in the bag.
Now, Katie, Arkansas. The thing about Arkansas, Kentucky beat them handily. Like, you beat them by 20. But I don't want to see Izzy Higginbottom anymore. I just don't. She scored, 5,000 points in that game. Now, of course, it wasn't quite 5,000. She had 32 points in that game. But, Katie, I don't want to see Izzy Higginbottom anymore. I mean, I'm not worried about that game. Like, if Kentucky plays Arkansas, I won't really sweat it. But I don't want to see her anymore because she lit up Kentucky in Memorial earlier this season.
I mean, she is just such a talented player, kind of stuck on a team that really isn't that great. And truth be told, I mean, I would rather face Georgia. I think that when you play Arkansas, or if you play Arkansas, you're probably also just going to win. But I do have this weird feeling that Izzy Higginbottom can go off for 43 like Georgia Amoore did against Oklahoma and come out with a win that way. She is just such a talented player. I think that she kind of has the power to turn Kentucky's I don't want to say automatic, but like almost automatic win into a loss.
And then there's Carly Keats and Jenna Lawrence. They combined for 27 in that game. The only other two Razorbacks to score in double figures. But Katie, I'm not super worried about Arkansas, but they do have some key players, and it really just starts with Izzy Higginbottom, averaging 24 points per game, 23.9 to be exact, shooting 33% from deep. But Katie, she didn't really do much against Kentucky at all, scoring just 3 points. But Kiki Smith is another one, right? Averaging 41% from deep. Tremendous three-point shooter, 10.4 points per game. I don't want to see either Higginbottom or Smith really go off. I don't think they will. Well, Higginbottom's always going to get hers, I think. But if Kentucky and Arkansas meet, first of all, I'll take that because, again, that means you don't have to play Oklahoma. But I don't want to see those two go off. It's probably going to happen, but I don't want to see it. I'm still not worried about Kentucky losing that game, really, though.
No, and if I remember correctly, I think that the defensive matchups for Kentucky against Arkansas were really good. I think that Georgia guarded, oh my gosh, Kiki Smith. I'm pretty sure that Georgia was on Kiki Smith the whole time. And so I think that she did a good job isolating her and making sure that she was not able to shoot three, like she's clearly very, very good at. So I think the defensive effort needs to be there, and it clearly will be. I mean, they did a great job with the first game.
Steven, if you can pull up just the SEC tournament bracket real quick, like we had. You look at the bracket, Katie, you're probably going to play Oklahoma. I think it's a pretty safe bet you're going to play Oklahoma on Friday. To me, I want to see Kentucky win that game for two reasons. One, you beat them already, and like you said, Oklahoma's not going to have the rest that Kentucky has. Then you get into Saturday. Kentucky's probably going to play South Carolina. Now, it's interesting to me is that, Tennessee, who was vying for a double bye not that long ago, Katie, is all the way down at number 9 playing in the first round. I mean, you want to talk about a collapse to end that's in the regular season. Tennessee's definitely had that. But, they're going to beat Texas A&M. And they lost to Vanderbilt by 1 point, at Vandy earlier in the year. That's going to be an interesting one. But I would imagine, knowing Kim Caldwell, kind of knowing their team, they're probably going to be a little angry about, the end of their season. They're probably going to beat Vanderbilt. Tennessee and South Carolina is an interesting game because Tennessee wasn't that long ago, Katie. They were number 11 team in the country coming into Memorial, right? And then you look at the bottom part of that bracket, Texas is probably going to play Ole Miss. Of course, Ole Miss is a very good team who could beat Texas, but you don't know that. Of course, Texas, I think, in my opinion, is playing like the best team in the country right now. And then Alabama and LSU probably going to be the matchup you get there. LSU, Alabama beat LSU just a few days ago, right? I think my point in saying all this, Katie, and you can put it back on our faces now, Steven. My point in saying kind of all of that was just it's going to be interesting, Katie. It's going to be this isn't the end, like the SEC tournament. Unlike last year, and I know Kentucky made a little bit of a run under Kyle Elsey, won a game or two. Kentucky can do something here.
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky, this isn't like a death sentence waiting to happen. You play Oklahoma, I would say Kentucky should be favored in, right? If you're a betting man. And then let's just see what happens on Saturday and Sunday. Maybe South Carolina drops one. Maybe you beat South Carolina on a neutral court. And then hopefully Texas loses before the title game. But even then, let's take another swing at them. Or you play LSU. You're already up 16 on them. Let's finish the job this time. Katie, there's no reason in my mind why Kentucky can't go win their third ever SEC championship, under Kenny Brooks this season.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that it's going to be tough. I mean, clearly it's going to be a difficult road for Kentucky to make it to the end, but I do think they can, especially if you beat South Carolina like we saw Kentucky can do. I think that at this point it's just important to be optimistic and not look at the seeds and not really take the rankings seriously because we've seen so much crazy stuff happen this weekend and positions change and bracketology comes out and then it gets completely reversed because everyone ends up losing. Like this is March. I feel cringy saying that. Like this is March, and so crazier things have happened, but I do think that Kentucky can make a run and I think they can win.
On the men's side, John Rothstein, CBS Sports guy, tweeted out, "This is March," and I felt it pump in my veins. Katie, you're probably going to think I'm a psychopath, but that's okay. But the CBS March Madness theme, the dun 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 dun, I've had that playing in my ears for the last 3 days now. March is here, and I love it. Best time of the year. Who cares about Christmas or Halloween or any of these holidays? I'm here for March. Katie, before we get out of here, what's your prediction for the SEC tournament? How far is Kentucky going to get?
If I had to guess, I would say realistically semifinals, hopefully championship, come out with a win over Texas.
You know what? I'm saying it out loud in the universe. Kentucky's going to make the championship game. They're going to be matched up against LSU. You know why? Because LSU is going to pull off the upset against Texas because they lost to Texas earlier in the year, and it's time for Kim Mulkey to get that win. And Kenny Brooks is going to get his revenge against LSU in the championship game, and Kentucky is going to win the damn SEC tournament for the first time since 2022, for the third time in program history, and we're going to go riding into the NCAA tournament with all the momentum in the world. I'm Phoenix Stevens alongside Katie Hutchinson. I'll see you all in Greenville. We're going to have all the coverage ready for you. This has been the Memorial Memo. We will see you guys next time.